I was standing in my backyard in Tampa, Florida, watching my fence collapse in real time, and all I could think was that this had to be some kind of nightmare. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the humid afternoon air as another section of my brand-new cedar fence buckled under the weight of thick bamboo stalks that had pushed through from my neighbor's yard. I'd spent $8,000 on that fence just 6 months ago, and now it looked like a war zone. My name is Zachary Owens, and I had lived in the Palmetto Springs subdivision for 3 years. It was one of those upscale planned communities where every house looked slightly different, but somehow exactly the same, with strict rules about everything from mailbox colors to what kind of grass you could plant. I'd always followed the rules, paid my dues on time, and never caused any trouble. My neighbor, Richard Brennan, had moved in 2 years ago, and for the most part, we got along fine. We would wave at each other, make small talk about the weather, and occasionally help each other out with taking in packages when one of us was out of town. But then Richard decided to plant bamboo. I remember the day he told me about it. We were both outside washing our cars on a Saturday morning, and he mentioned that he wanted more privacy in his backyard. He said bamboo would grow fast and create a natural screen. I nodded along, not thinking much of it. I had heard bamboo could be invasive, but I figured he knew what he was doing. He was a landscape architect after all. Surely he would take the proper precautions. That was 18 months ago. The bamboo started innocent enough. Thin green shoots popped up near his property line, and within weeks they were 6 feet tall. Within months, they were 15 feet tall, creating a dense wall of green that completely blocked the view into his yard. I actually thought it looked pretty nice at first. The swaying stalks had a peaceful, zen garden quality to them. Then, I started noticing shoots coming up on my side of the property line. Just a few at first, which I would cut down with garden shears. But they kept coming back, thicker and more numerous each time. I mentioned it to Richard over the fence one evening, trying to keep my tone friendly and neighborly. "Hey Richard, I keep getting bamboo shoots on my side. Is there any way to stop them from spreading?" He had looked uncomfortable, scratching the back of his head. "Yeah, I have been noticing that. I thought I had put in a root barrier, but maybe it was not deep enough. Let me look into it." That was 8 months ago, and he never looked into it. The shoots kept coming, and I kept cutting them down, but it was like fighting a hydra. For every one I cut, 3 more would pop up. They started appearing in my flower beds, pushing up through the mulch. They cracked through the edge of my patio. One particularly aggressive shoot even came up right through the middle of my lawn, ruining the carefully maintained St. Augustine grass I'd spent years cultivating. 3 months ago, I noticed the bamboo rhizomes had reached my fence. The thick, woody underground stems were pushing against the posts, and I could see the fence starting to lean. I went over to Richard's house and knocked on his door. His wife answered, looking stressed. "Is Richard home? I really need to talk to him about the bamboo situation," she sighed. "He is at work, but I will have him call you. I know the bamboo has gotten out of control. We have been meaning to deal with it, but things have been crazy with his job." He never called me back. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I researched bamboo removal and quickly realized I was dealing with a nightmare plant. The variety Richard had planted was running bamboo, not clumping bamboo, which meant its rhizomes could spread 30 feet or more underground. I spent 2 weekends digging trenches along my property line, trying to cut through the rhizome network. I hit bamboo roots everywhere I dug. They were thick as my wrist in some places, woody and incredibly tough. I went through 3 shovel blades and a reciprocating saw blade trying to cut them all. But it was too late for my fence. The pressure from the constantly expanding bamboo grove had pushed the posts out of alignment. The rails had started to separate from the posts. And then, on this particularly humid Tuesday afternoon in June, the whole thing just gave way. I stood there watching section after section collapse, domino style, as the bamboo pushed through like some kind of invasive green tsunami. Years of underground growth, all that pent-up pressure finally breaking free. The destruction happened surprisingly fast. In less than 5 minutes, 30 feet of fence was completely destroyed, with another 20 feet severely damaged and leaning at dangerous angles. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures and videos, documenting everything. The thick bamboo culms, some of them 4 inches in diameter, had pushed right through the fence boards. The posts had been shoved completely out of plumb, with several snapped off at ground level. The concrete footings were still intact, but the posts had broken clean through. It was total devastation. My hands were shaking as I called Richard. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Richard, this is Zach. Your bamboo just destroyed my fence. I am talking completely demolished 30 feet of it. You need to get home and see this. We need to talk about how you are going to fix this." I hung up and immediately called my insurance company. After navigating through the automated menu system, I finally reached a human being named Patricia, who listened to my explanation with what sounded like genuine sympathy. "So your neighbor's bamboo destroyed your fence?" she repeated, as if making sure she heard correctly. "Yes. It pushed through from underground and just crushed the whole thing." "Okay, well, that would fall under your property insurance, and you would need to pay your deductible. However, since the damage was caused by your neighbor's negligence in controlling an invasive plant species, you would likely have grounds to sue him for the cost of repairs and your deductible. We can send an adjuster out tomorrow to assess the damage." "How much are we talking about to replace 50 feet of fence? Cedar fencing in Florida right now? You are probably looking at $10,000 to $15,000 for materials and labor, depending on the height and style." My stomach dropped. I had just replaced this fence 6 months ago. I could not afford another $15,000 right now. My daughter was starting college in the fall, and every spare dollar was going toward that. I was still standing in my backyard, staring at the wreckage, when Richard finally pulled into his driveway 2 hours later. I walked around to the front of my house and met him as he was getting out of his car. "Did you get my message?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. He looked guilty, which at least meant he had checked his voicemail. "Yeah, I saw it. I'm so sorry, Zach. Let me change clothes and come look at the damage." 5 minutes later, we were both standing in my backyard. Richard's face went pale when he saw what had happened. "Oh my God," he whispered. "I did not think it would get this bad." "I have been telling you for months that the bamboo was out of control," I said, and I could hear the anger creeping into my voice despite my best efforts. "I showed you the shoots coming up in my yard. I told you the fence was starting to lean. You said you would handle it." I know. Work has been insane, and I kept meaning to call someone, but I just never got around to it." He ran his hands through his hair. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to pay to replace my fence. My insurance company said I would have to pay my deductible, but since this was caused by your negligence, you are liable for the full cost." His face went from pale to red. "How much are we talking?" $10,000 to $15,000. "What? For a fence?" "For a custom cedar fence that I just installed 6 months ago, yes. And that is not even counting the damage to my landscaping, my patio, and my lawn from your bamboo. We are probably looking at closer to $20,000 all in." Richard looked like he might be sick. "I do not have that kind of money just sitting around." "Then you will need to file a claim with your homeowner's insurance. Their liability coverage should handle this." He shook his head slowly. "My deductible is $5,000, and if I file a claim, my rates are going to go through the roof. That is not my problem, Richard. You planted an invasive species without proper containment. You ignored my complaints about it spreading to my property. You failed to maintain it. This is 100% on you." We stared at each other for a long moment. The neighborly friendliness that had existed between us for 2 years had evaporated completely. "Let me talk to my wife and call my insurance company," he finally said. "I will get back to you." "Soon, Richard. I need this fixed soon. I have a dog, and now there's a giant hole in my fence." He nodded and walked back to his house, his shoulders slumped. I spent the rest of the evening calling contractors for estimates. Most of them could not even come out for a week or two, given how busy they were with summer projects. The ones who could come sooner quoted me prices that made my head spin. The cheapest estimate was $12,000, and that was for a basic design, not the craftsman style I had before. One contractor took a look at the bamboo still pushing through and told me that if I did not deal with the root system, it would just destroy the new fence too. "You need to excavate along the whole property line," he said, shaking his head. "Dig down at least 3 feet, cut out all the rhizomes, and install a proper root barrier. Otherwise, you're just putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound." "How much would that cost?" With the excavation, root removal, and proper HDPE root barrier installation, you were looking at another $8,000 to $10,000 minimum. So now we were talking about $20,000 to $25,000 total. My hands were shaking again as I showed the contractor out. That night, I barely slept. I kept running the numbers in my head, trying to figure out how I was going to pay for this if Richard's insurance did not cover it. I could drain my emergency fund, but that would leave me vulnerable if something else went wrong. I could take out a home equity loan, but interest rates were high right now. Every scenario I ran through ended with me being out tens of thousands of dollars because my neighbor had been too lazy to properly maintain his landscaping. The next morning, I was up early, documenting more of the damage. The insurance adjuster was coming at 10, and I wanted to make sure I had everything photographed. I was measuring the length of destroyed fence when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to find a woman I had never seen before, standing in my yard, holding a clipboard. She was probably in her late 50s, with short blonde hair styled in that specific way that suburban women of a certain age seem to favor. She wore pressed khaki capris, a polo shirt with an embroidered logo, and an expression that immediately set off alarm bells in my head. "Excuse me, can I help you?" I asked. "I am Brenda Whitmore, president of the Palmetto Springs Homeowners Association. I received a complaint about the state of your property." My jaw actually dropped. A complaint? My fence was just destroyed yesterday by my neighbor's bamboo. I am in the process of getting it fixed. She made a note on her clipboard, her lips pressed into a thin line. Be that as it may, the HOA bylaws clearly state that all fences must be maintained in good repair. Your fence is currently in violation of Section 7.3 of the Community Guidelines. You cannot be serious. I am quite serious, Mr. Owens. You have 30 days to bring your property into compliance, or you will face fines of $100 per day. Did you not hear what I just said? My neighbor's invasive bamboo destroyed my fence. This is not my fault. The HOA bylaws make no provisions for whose fault it is. The fence is on your property. Therefore, it is your responsibility to maintain it. She handed me a formal notice of violation. 30 days, Mr. Owens. She turned and walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing there with a piece of paper in my hand and a whole new level of anger building in my chest. I immediately went next door and pounded on Richard's door. He answered, looking haggard, like he had not slept either. "Did you call the HOA on me?" I demanded. He blinked in confusion. "What? No, why would I do that? Someone reported my destroyed fence to the HOA, and now they are threatening to fine me if I do not fix it within 30 days. Richard's confusion turned to anger. "That is ridiculous. This is my fault, not yours. Let me call them." "Did you call your insurance company yet?" His expression told me everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth. "They said that bamboo is considered a landscaping element, and damage caused by landscaping is specifically excluded from liability coverage unless I can prove I took reasonable steps to maintain it." "And did you take reasonable steps to maintain it?" He looked down. "They are saying no, because I did not install a proper root barrier and I did not respond to your complaints about it spreading. So what does that mean? It means my insurance is not going to cover this." I felt like the ground was dropping out from under me. "Richard, I cannot afford to pay for this. You planted that bamboo. You need to figure out how to make this right." I know. I am trying. Maybe I can set up a payment plan or something. Pay you back over time. The HOA is giving me 30 days before they start fining me $100 per day. I need this fixed now, not over time. We were both getting louder, our conversation turning into an argument right there on his front porch. His wife came to the door, looking upset. "What's going on?" she asked. "Your husband's bamboo destroyed my fence, his insurance will not cover it, and now the HOA is threatening to fine me if I do not fix it within 30 days, I said, not caring anymore if I sounded harsh. She turned to Richard with an expression that could have melted steel. "I told you that bamboo was a bad idea. I told you 2 years ago." "Not helping, Jennifer," Richard muttered. "You know what else is not helping? The fact that we do not have $20,000 to pay for fence repairs." She looked at me with genuine regret. "I am sorry, Zach, I really am. But we are barely making our mortgage payments as it is. Richard's company did layoffs last month, and he has been lucky to keep his job. We do not have the money." I stood there looking at both of them, and despite my anger, I could see they were telling the truth. They looked stressed and tired and worried. But that did not change the fact that I was the one stuck with a destroyed fence and mounting bills. "Then what am I supposed to do?" I asked. Neither of them had an answer. The insurance adjuster arrived at 10 as scheduled. He spent an hour examining the damage, taking measurements and photos and occasionally shaking his head. When he was done, he sat down with me at my kitchen table to go over his findings. "The good news is that the damage is definitely covered under your policy," he said, pulling out his tablet. "The bad news is that this is going to be expensive. I am estimating $14,500 for fence replacement, including removal of the damaged sections. That does not include the bamboo remediation, which is considered landscaping and falls under a different coverage category with its own limits." "How much does that cover?" "Your policy has a $5,000 limit on landscaping damage. The bamboo removal and root barrier installation is probably going to run you $8,000 to $10,000, so you would be out of pocket $3,000 to $5,000 on that end. Plus your deductible of $2,500 on the fence." So I was looking at $5,500 to $7,500 out of pocket, minimum. It was better than $25,000, but it was still money I did not have readily available. And I can pursue my neighbor for reimbursement?" I asked. "Absolutely. In fact, we will probably do that on your behalf through subrogation. Once we pay out your claim, we will go after his insurance company. If they deny coverage, we might take him to small claims court. These things can take a while, though, sometimes 6 months to a year. And in the meantime, I have to pay my deductible and the uncovered costs?" "Yes, I'm afraid so." I signed the paperwork and the adjuster left. I just committed to spending over $5,000 I did not have, with no guarantee I would ever get it back. I could feel a stress headache building behind my eyes. The rest of the week was a blur of phone calls and paperwork. I hired the contractor who had given me the $12,000 estimate, negotiating him up to the insurance company's $14,500 number by agreeing to use slightly higher quality materials. He could start in 2 weeks. I also hired a landscaping company that specialized in invasive species removal. They would come out next week to excavate the bamboo rhizomes and install a proper root barrier. Every time I looked at the destruction in my backyard, I felt a fresh wave of anger. Not just at Richard, though I was definitely angry at him, but at the whole situation. I'd done everything right, and I was still the one getting punished for someone else's negligence. The HOA made things worse. Brenda Whitmore sent me a follow-up email reminding me of my 30-day deadline, with a helpful attachment of the relevant bylaws highlighted in yellow. She also sent me a separate violation notice for the bamboo shoots that had sprouted in my front yard, which apparently violated Section 4.7 regarding unapproved plant species in maintained lawn areas. I called the HOA office, ready to unleash all my frustration on whoever answered. It was Brenda, of course. "Mr. Owens, how can I help you?" "You can start by being reasonable," I said. "The bamboo in my yard is from my neighbor's property. I am in the process of having it removed. Sending me violation notices is not helping anything. The HOA standards apply equally to all residents, regardless of circumstances. If we made exceptions for every situation, the rules would be meaningless. My fence was destroyed through no fault of my own. I am doing everything I can to fix it as quickly as possible. What exactly do you expect me to do differently?" "I expect you to comply with the community guidelines that you agreed to when you purchased your home." The condescension in her voice made my blood pressure spike. "I am complying. I have contractors scheduled. The work is being done. See that it is completed within the 30-day window, Mr. Owens. I would hate to have to assess fines." She hung up before I could respond. I immediately sent an email to the HOA board, copying all 5 members, explaining the situation, and requesting a reasonable extension given the circumstances. I laid out the timeline of events, the contractor schedules, and the fact that the damage was caused by a neighbor's negligence. I tried to keep my tone professional, even though what I really wanted to do was write a scathing manifesto about petty tyrants on power trips. Only one board member responded, a retired engineer named Tom Castellano who lived 3 streets over. "Zach, I am sorry you are dealing with this. Unfortunately, Brenda is technically correct that the bylaws do not provide for extensions based on fault. However, I'm going to bring this up at the next board meeting and suggest we revisit that policy. In the meantime, I will personally vouch for you that you are working in good faith to resolve the issue. Hang in there. It was something at least. The bamboo removal team arrived on Monday morning with a small excavator and a crew of 4 guys who looked like they had done this kind of work before. The crew chief, a weathered man named Miguel, took one look at the bamboo grove in Richard's yard and whistled low. "That is some serious bamboo," he said. "How long has it been growing?" "About 18 months, maybe 2 years. "And no root barrier?" "No." He shook his head. "We see this a lot. People do not understand what they are getting into with running bamboo. This stuff can bust through concrete if it wants to." They got to work excavating a trench along my property line, 3 feet deep and 18 inches wide. As they dug, they pulled out rhizome after rhizome, thick woody masses that looked more like small tree roots than bamboo. Some of them extended 4 feet into my yard from the property line. One particularly large rhizome had shoots branching off in 3 directions, creating a network that would have eventually taken over my entire backyard. I watched them work, simultaneously fascinated and horrified by how extensive the underground invasion had been. It was like watching doctors remove cancer. Richard came out after about an hour, looking sheepish. Miguel stopped the excavator and climbed down. "You the neighbor who planted this?" Miguel asked. Richard nodded. "You know this is running bamboo, right? This stuff is illegal to plant without containment in some states." "I know that now," Richard said quietly. Miguel gestured at the massive pile of rhizomes they had already pulled out. "You have got the same problem on your side of the fence, actually worse, because that is where the mother grove is. If you do not deal with it, it is going to keep spreading. Could get under your foundation, crack your driveway, get into your plumbing. I have seen bamboo push up through people's floors before." Richard's face went pale. "How much would it cost to remove all of it?" Miguel looked over at the dense bamboo grove, which covered probably a quarter of Richard's backyard. "To remove the whole thing, excavate all the rhizomes, haul away the culms, restore the soil, you are looking at 15 to 20,000 easy." I watched Richard do the same mental math I had been doing all week, trying to figure out where he was going to find that kind of money. Part of me felt a bit of vindictive satisfaction seeing him realize the full extent of what his landscaping choice was going to cost. But another part of me just felt tired and sad that it had come to this. The bamboo removal took 3 days. By the time they were done, I had a massive trench running the length of my property line, now filled with a professional-grade HDPE root barrier that would supposedly stop any future invasions. The landscaping crew restored the soil, but I was left with a muddy scar across my backyard that would take weeks to recover. The bill came to $9,600. After my insurance paid their $5,000 limit on landscaping damage, I owed $4,600. I put it on my credit card and tried not to think about the interest. The fence contractors started work the following Monday, exactly 2 weeks after the destruction. They worked fast, pulling out the broken posts and damaged rails, setting new posts in concrete, and building a new fence that looked almost identical to the one that had been there before. It was good work, professional, and clean. It was also another $2,500 out of my pocket after insurance. I was now out over $7,000 because of Richard's bamboo, and there was no guarantee I would ever get it back. While the fence work was progressing, I got another email from Brenda Whitmore. This time, she was not emailing me about my property. She was emailing me about Richard's property. "Dear Mr. Owens, as the complaining party in the ongoing bamboo dispute, I wanted to inform you that the HOA has issued a formal violation notice to Richard Brennan regarding his non-compliant landscaping. The bamboo grove on his property is deemed to be a nuisance and a threat to neighboring properties. He has been ordered to remove it within 45 days or face fines of $200 per day." I stared at the email in disbelief. On one hand, Richard absolutely needed to remove that bamboo before it caused more damage. On the other hand, I had not asked the HOA to get involved, and the fines they were threatening seemed excessive. $200 per day would bankrupt Richard in a matter of weeks. I forwarded the email to Richard with a short message. "Did you get this from the HOA?" His response came back within minutes. "Yes, I do not know what I am going to do. I cannot afford to remove the bamboo." Despite everything, I felt bad for him. He had made a stupid mistake, and now it was snowballing into a financial disaster. I called him. "Richard, look, I am still angry about my fence, but the HOA is going overboard here. $200 a day is ridiculous." "I know." I called Brenda Whitmore and tried to explain that I'm working on getting quotes for removal, but she said the bylaws are clear. She would not budge. "What are you going to do?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know. Maybe I will try to remove it myself. Rent some equipment, do the labor myself to save money." "Richard, that is $20,000 worth of work according to the professionals, and you have a full-time job." "Then what would you suggest?" "Because I am out of ideas." I did not have an answer for him. My fence was completed 27 days after the initial destruction, 3 days before the HOA deadline. I took photos of the finished work and emailed them to Brenda Whitmore with the subject line, "Fence repairs completed." Her response was terse. "Thank you for bringing your property into compliance." No acknowledgement of the circumstances, no understanding of the stress and expense I had gone through. Just a cold confirmation that I had followed her rules. I was starting to really hate that woman. Richard, meanwhile, was in a worse situation. He had gotten several quotes for bamboo removal, all of them in the $15,000 to $20,000 range. He had tried to negotiate payment plans, but most contractors wanted at least half up front. He did not have it. His wife's parents offered to loan them $5,000, but that still left them well short of what they needed. So Richard did what desperate people do. He decided to try to remove the bamboo himself. I watched from my back window as he spent his evenings and weekends attacking the bamboo grove with a chainsaw and a rented mini excavator. It was brutal work. The bamboo culms were tough and dense, and there were hundreds of them. Each time he cut one down, he had to dig out the root ball, which was often the size of a beach ball and just as difficult to move. The excavator helped, but Richard clearly did not have much experience operating it. He kept digging too shallow, missing the deeper rhizomes, or swinging the bucket too hard and gouging his lawn. After 2 weeks of this, he had maybe cleared a quarter of the bamboo, and his yard looked like a construction site. Massive piles of cut bamboo stalks lined his driveway. Holes and trenches crisscrossed his lawn, and the remaining 3/4 of the bamboo grove stood there, still thriving, still spreading underground. The HOA's 45-day deadline came and went. Richard was not even close to finishing. Brenda Whitmore sent him his first fine notice the very next day. $200 for failure to comply. The notice stated that he would continue to be fined $200 for every day the violation remained uncorrected. Richard called me that evening, and I could hear the panic in his voice. "Zach, I do not know what to do. If they keep fining me $200 a day, that is $6,000 a month. I will lose my house." "Have you talked to a lawyer?" I called a few. They all say that HOAs have pretty broad authority to enforce their bylaws, and the bamboo is clearly a violation. One lawyer said I could fight it, but legal fees would probably cost more than just paying to have the bamboo removed professionally. What about declaring bankruptcy or something? Then I would definitely lose the house, and it would destroy my credit for years. He sighed heavily. I am thinking about just selling and moving. Cut my losses. I felt a complicated mix of emotions hearing that. Part of me was still angry at Richard for creating this mess in the first place, but another part of me recognized that the punishment had long since exceeded the crime. He had made a mistake with his landscaping, and now he was facing financial ruin. "Let me think about this," I said. "Maybe there's another way." That night, I did something I had not done in years. I went to a HOA board meeting. The meetings were held monthly in the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that also housed a gym and a pool. I arrived at 7, along with about a dozen other residents who apparently had their own grievances to air. The board sat at a folding table at the front of the room, Brenda Whitmore in the center, flanked by 4 other board members. Tom Castellano, the engineer who had emailed me, was there. The others were a retired schoolteacher named Patricia Gomez, a real estate agent named Susan Chen, and a younger guy who worked in finance named Marcus Webb. Brenda called the meeting to order and launched into a review of last month's minutes, followed by a financial report, followed by a discussion of upcoming community events. It was all remarkably boring. Several residents left before we even got to the open comment period. When we finally reached public comments, I raised my hand. Brenda acknowledged me with a tight smile. "Mr. Owens, please keep your comments to 3 minutes." I stood up. "I want to talk about the bamboo situation between me and my neighbor Richard Brennan. As you all know, his bamboo destroyed my fence. It cost me over $7,000 out of pocket to repair the damage. But now the HOA is fining him $200 per day for having that bamboo on his property. That is $6,000 a month. Within a few months, you are going to bankrupt a homeowner over a landscaping mistake." Brenda's expression did not change. "The bylaws are clear about nuisance vegetation. Mr. Brennan was given 45 days to comply. He failed to do so. Because professional removal costs $20,000 and he cannot afford it. He is trying to do the work himself, but it is taking time. Can the board show some flexibility here? Suspend the fines while he is actively working on the problem?" Patricia Gomez spoke up. "If we suspend the fines for one person, we set a precedent that anyone can just claim they are working on a problem and avoid penalties indefinitely." "I'm not suggesting you let him off the hook forever," I said. "I'm suggesting you work with him on a reasonable timeline. The man is going to lose his house over bamboo." Susan Chen shook her head. "Mr. Brennan created this problem by planting an invasive species without proper containment. The HOA has a responsibility to protect the property values and quality of life for all residents. That bamboo is a threat to other properties beyond just yours." "So your solution is to fine him into foreclosure?" Brenda cut in. "Mr. Owens, your 3 minutes are up. We will take your comments under advisement. Next?" I sat down, frustrated. The meeting continued for another hour, covering topics like pool rules and a dispute over holiday decorations. When it finally ended, Tom Castellano approached me. "I hear what you are saying," he said quietly. "And personally, I agree the fines are excessive. But Brenda runs this board with an iron fist, and she has the backing of Patricia and Susan. Marcus and I are usually outvoted on anything that involves leniency. So what can I do? Not much unless you can get enough homeowners to show up to the next meeting and demand a policy change, or run for the board yourself next year." He shrugged apologetically. "I know it is not what you want to hear." I drove home feeling defeated. The HOA was going to bleed Richard dry, and there was apparently nothing anyone could do about it. The fines continued. $200 a day, every day. After 2 weeks, Richard owed $2,800. After a month, $6,000. The HOA sent collection notices. They threatened liens on his property. Richard kept working on removing the bamboo himself, but he was fighting a losing battle against both the plant and the calendar. Then, things got worse. I came home from work one evening to find Richard sitting on his front porch, holding a piece of paper and staring at nothing. His wife's car was gone, and the house had an empty feeling to it. "Richard, you okay?" I asked, walking over. He looked up at me with hollow eyes. "Jennifer left, took the kids and went to stay with her parents." "I'm sorry, man. She said she could not watch me destroy our family over bamboo. Said I should have just paid professionals to handle it from the beginning, that I was too proud to admit I needed help." He laughed bitterly. "She is probably right. What are you going to do?" "I do not know. I owe the HOA almost $9,000 in fines now. My credit cards are maxed out. I took out a personal loan to try to pay for professional removal, but it is not enough. I am drowning, Zach." I sat down on the porch steps next to him, not knowing what to say. We had gone from friendly neighbors to adversaries to something else entirely. Two men caught in the same nightmare from different angles. "What is that?" I asked, gesturing to the paper in his hand. "It is a lawsuit. The HOA is suing me for the accumulated fines plus legal fees. They're going to put a lien on my house." He crumpled the paper. "I'm going to lose everything because I planted the wrong type of grass." "It was not grass, it was bamboo," I said, and then immediately regretted the correction. But Richard laughed, a real laugh this time. "Right. Bamboo. The worst decision I ever made." We sat there in silence for a while as the sun set over our suburban neighborhood, painting the sky orange and purple. Somewhere down the street, kids were playing. A dog barked. Life went on normally for everyone else. "I'm going to help you," I heard myself say. Richard looked at me in surprise. "What?" "I'm going to help you fight the HOA." This has gone too far. Zach, you do not owe me anything. I destroyed your fence. I know, and I'm still angry about that. But this is not about what happened between us anymore. This is about an HOA that is abusing its power. I stood up. Let me make some calls. I spent the next several days researching HOA law in Florida, which turned out to be a fascinating and terrifying rabbit hole. Florida HOAs have tremendous power granted to them by state statute. They can fine homeowners, place liens on properties, and even foreclose in some cases. But that power is not unlimited. There are restrictions and requirements, and if an HOA oversteps, homeowners have legal recourse. I found a law firm in Tampa that specialized in HOA disputes. The attorney, a sharp woman named Rachel Martinez, agreed to a free consultation. I drove to her office with Richard and laid out the entire situation. Rachel listened carefully, taking notes. When we finished, she sat back in her chair. The HOA is on pretty solid ground with the initial violation notice, she said. The bamboo clearly violates the landscaping guidelines. However, the $200 daily fine is where things get interesting. Florida statute requires that HOA fines be reasonable and not excessive. $200 per day for a landscaping violation could potentially be challenged as punitive rather than corrective. So we can fight this? Richard asked hopefully. Possibly. We would need to argue that the HOA is using the fines to punish rather than encourage compliance, and that the amount is disproportionate to the violation. The fact that you have been actively working to remove the bamboo helps your case. We could also argue that the HOA failed to provide adequate notice or assistance in understanding what compliance would require. What about the lawsuit they filed? I asked. That is more serious. If they get a judgment and a lien on the property, they can eventually foreclose. But that process takes time, and we can fight the lawsuit on the grounds that the underlying fines were improper. She pulled out a fee agreement. My retainer for this kind of case is $5,000. Depending on how long it drags out, total costs could be $10,000 to $20,000. Richard's face fell. I do not have $5,000. We thanked Rachel for her time and left. As we were walking back to our cars, Richard looked defeated again. I appreciate you trying to help, but I cannot afford a lawyer. I can barely afford groceries right now. What if we went public with this? I said. The HOA is going to hate the negative attention. What do you mean, go public? Local news, social media. There's nothing people hate more than an abusive HOA. If we can get enough public pressure, maybe the board will back down. Richard considered this. You think that would work? I think it is worth a try, and it is free. That night, I crafted a detailed post about the entire situation and shared it on the Palmetto Springs Community Facebook page. I laid out the timeline, Richard planting bamboo, it spreading to my yard, my fence being destroyed, the HOA fining him into oblivion. I included photos of the destroyed fence, the bamboo removal work, and the collection notices from the HOA. I ended with a question. Is this really what our HOA fees are going for? Bankrupting our neighbors over landscaping disputes? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within an hour, the post had 50 comments. Within 3 hours, over 200. People shared stories of their own disputes with the HOA, complaints about Brenda Whitmore's management style, frustrations with petty rule enforcement. A few people defended the HOA, arguing that rules needed to be enforced or the community would fall apart. But they were vastly outnumbered by people who felt the punishment had exceeded the crime. The local news picked it up the next day. A reporter from Bay News 9 called me and asked if they could do a story. I said yes and checked with Richard, who also agreed. The news crew came out that afternoon. They filmed the destroyed sections of yard where Richard had been trying to remove the bamboo. They interviewed both of us about what had happened. They got footage of the HOA's violation notices and fine statements. The reporter, a young woman named Kelly Sharp, seemed genuinely outraged by the story. $200 a day for bamboo? She said while they were setting up for my interview. That is insane. The story aired that evening on the local news. They titled it, HOA Nightmare, Neighbor Feud Over Bamboo Leads to Bankruptcy. It was a 5-minute segment that painted the HOA, and specifically Brenda Whitmore, as petty tyrants destroying a family over a landscaping mistake. The segment ended with Kelly Sharp standing in front of the Palmetto Springs entrance sign. We reached out to the HOA board president Brenda Whitmore for comment, but she declined to speak with us. The question remains, when does enforcement of community standards cross the line into harassment? For Richard Brennan and his family, that line was crossed months ago. The reaction was swift and brutal for the HOA. The news segment was shared thousands of times on social media. The Palmetto Springs Facebook page exploded with angry comments. People started showing up at HOA board meetings demanding Brenda Whitmore's resignation. Local news picked up follow-up stories about HOA abuse in Florida more broadly, using Richard's case as an example. Brenda tried to fight back. She sent an email to all Palmetto Springs residents defending the HOA's actions and claiming that the news story had been unfair and biased. She argued that rules existed for a reason and that exceptions could not be made just because someone claimed hardship. The email made things worse. People forwarded it to the local news with commentary about how tone-deaf and heartless it was. Someone created a Change.org petition calling for Brenda to resign. It got over 5,000 signatures. The HOA's lawyer apparently advised them to back down. 2 weeks after the news story aired, I received an email from Susan Chen, the real estate agent on the board. It was sent to me and Richard. After careful consideration, the HOA board has decided to suspend the daily fines against Richard Brennan while he continues to work on removing the bamboo. We are also offering to reduce the accumulated fines by 75% as a gesture of good faith. We hope this will allow Mr. Brennan to resolve the landscaping issue without further financial hardship. Richard called me as soon as he got the email. Did you see this? They are backing down. I saw it. 75% reduction. That brings your fines from about $12,000 down to $3,000, right? Yes, I can actually pay $3,000. It will wipe out my savings, but I can do it. He sounded lighter than he had in weeks. And if they are not fining me $200 a day anymore, I can actually save up to hire professionals to finish the bamboo removal. Did you talk to Jennifer? I called her right after I got the email. She is still angry, but she said if I can show her a plan to fix this, she and the kids will come home. His voice cracked slightly. Thank you, Zach. I know you did not have to help me after everything I put you through. We are neighbors, I said. That still means something. Things improved after that. Richard paid the reduced fine and hired a professional crew to finish removing the bamboo. It took them another 3 weeks and cost him $8,000, which he had to borrow from his father-in-law, but it got done. His yard looked like a moonscape afterward, just bare dirt and holes, but at least the bamboo was gone. Jennifer and the kids moved back home. I saw them outside playing one weekend, and things seemed tentative but better between Richard and his wife. The stress had aged both of them, but they were working through it. My insurance company's subrogation department eventually recovered my deductible and out-of-pocket costs from Richard's homeowner's insurance. It turned out that once the news coverage made it clear how negligent Richard had been with the bamboo, his insurance company decided it was cheaper to pay out than fight a lawsuit. I got a check for $7,200 about 4 months after the whole thing started. It did not erase the stress and frustration, but it helped. The big surprise came 3 months after the news story at the annual HOA election meeting. I had not planned to attend, but Richard convinced me we should both be there. I want to see Brenda's face when she loses, he said. The community clubhouse was packed. Normally these meetings drew maybe 20 people. This time there were over 100 residents crammed into the small room, many of them standing along the walls. The local news had sent a camera crew, which sat in the back. The election process was straightforward. Any homeowner could run for the 5 board positions, and winners were determined by simple majority vote from the homeowners present. Typically, incumbents ran unopposed and were re-elected automatically. Not this year. 8 people ran for the 5 positions. Brenda Whitmore was one of them. The other incumbents, Patricia Gomez and Susan Chen, chose not to run again. Tom Castellano and Marcus Webb both ran for re-election. Each candidate gave a 2-minute speech. When it was Brenda's turn, she stood at the front of the room, looking smaller somehow than I remembered. "I have served as HOA president for 6 years," she said stiffly. "In that time, I have worked tirelessly to maintain our community standards and protect property values. Sometimes that means making difficult decisions that not everyone agrees with, but I have always acted in what I believe to be the best interests of Palmetto Springs." There was scattered, polite applause when she finished. Nothing like the enthusiasm that greeted other candidates, particularly a retired Marine colonel named James Peterson, who promised to bring some sanity and proportionality back to HOA enforcement. When the votes were counted, Brenda Whitmore came in 6th place. She was out. Patricia Gomez and Susan Chen's seats went to new candidates who ran on reform platforms. Tom Castellano and Marcus Webb were re-elected. James Peterson won the most votes and became the new board president. I watched Brenda gather her papers and leave the meeting early, alone. Part of me felt vindicated. She had been petty and inflexible, and her approach had caused real harm to Richard and his family. She deserved to lose her position, but another part of me just felt tired. This whole situation had started with a simple landscaping choice and spiraled into a nightmare that had almost destroyed a family, cost tens of thousands of dollars, and dominated months of our lives. All because people did not communicate, did not show flexibility, and let disputes escalate instead of working together to find solutions. The new HOA board's first official act was to revise the fine structure in the community bylaws. Daily fines were capped at $50 for landscaping violations, and the board was required to work with homeowners on reasonable compliance timelines before assessing any fines at all. They also created a dispute resolution process where neighbors could bring conflicts to a neutral mediator before involving the HOA. Richard and I were invited to speak at the meeting where these changes were announced. Richard talked about how the stress of the fines had nearly destroyed his marriage and his finances. I talked about how the rigid enforcement of rules without consideration for circumstances had made a bad situation worse. "We are all living in this community together," I said. "We need to remember that our neighbors are human beings, not just names on violation notices. People make mistakes, they struggle financially, they go through hard times. An HOA should be there to help maintain community standards, not punish people for being imperfect." The changes passed unanimously. Life slowly returned to normal after that. Richard's yard recovered. He planted grass seed and put in some new shrubs, carefully selected non-invasive varieties. My fence stood strong, protected now by the root barrier that would prevent any future bamboo incursions. We even helped each other out occasionally, the way neighbors should. He would loan me his pressure washer. I would help him move furniture. Small gestures that rebuilt the relationship that had been fractured by the bamboo disaster. One Saturday afternoon, about a year after the whole thing started, Richard and his family were having a barbecue in their backyard. I was outside washing my car when Jennifer walked over. "We are grilling burgers. You should come over and eat with us," she said. I hesitated. We had been cordial since everything settled, but we had not exactly been social. "Come on," she insisted. "Richard needs to hear your feedback on his new grill. He has been obsessing about whether he got the right one." I followed her over to their backyard. Richard was standing by a shiny new grill, prodding burgers with the focused intensity of a man who had spent too much time researching cooking temperatures. Their kids were playing in the sprinkler, laughing and shrieking. "Zach, finally. Tell me this grill was worth it," Richard said when he saw me. We spent the evening eating burgers, drinking beer, and deliberately not talking about bamboo or HOAs or fences. It was surprisingly easy once we decided to just move forward. As I was leaving that night, Richard walked me to the front yard. "I never really apologized properly," he said. "Not just for the fence, but for all of it. I should have dealt with the bamboo when you first mentioned it was spreading. I should have researched what I was planting. I should have been a better neighbor." "We both could have handled things better," I said. "I could have tried harder to work with you before everything blew up." He nodded. "Well, I learned my lesson about invasive species, and about HOA politics, and about not letting problems fester until they become disasters. Expensive lessons. The most expensive, but we got through it," He stuck out his hand. Thanks for having my back when things got really bad. I would not have survived the HOA fight without you. I shook his hand. We are neighbors. That is what neighbors do. The whole experience changed how I viewed community living. Before the bamboo incident, I'd been a passive member of the HOA, someone who paid dues and followed rules without really thinking about how the community was governed. After everything that happened, I started attending board meetings regularly. Not because I wanted to, but because I felt a responsibility to make sure the HOA remained reasonable and balanced. James Peterson turned out to be an excellent board president. He ran meetings efficiently and fairly, listened to homeowner concerns, and worked to find practical solutions instead of defaulting to violations and fines. The community felt less tense under his leadership. Brenda Whitmore moved out of Palmetto Springs about 6 months after losing her board position. Someone told me she had taken a job in another city, but I never confirmed it. I saw her once at the grocery store before she left. We made brief eye contact across the produce section, and I nodded politely. She looked away and kept walking. I felt no animosity toward her anymore, just a vague sadness that she had defined herself so completely by her HOA role that losing it seemed to have broken something in her. The bamboo saga became legendary in Palmetto Springs. New residents would hear the story and come ask me or Richard about it, wanting to know if it was really true. It became a cautionary tale about invasive plants, about HOA overreach, about the importance of being a good neighbor. One couple even used it as leverage to get the previous owners of a house they were buying to remove some aggressive bamboo before closing. Richard eventually paid back his father-in-law for the bamboo removal loan. It took him 18 months, but he did it. He and Jennifer went to marriage counseling to work through the stress the whole situation had put on their relationship. They came out stronger, according to Jennifer, who told me about it one day while we were both getting our mail. The bamboo nearly destroyed us, she said, but working through it together, surviving that nightmare, it reminded us why we got married in the first place. We are a team. We can get through anything if we stick together. As for me, I came away from the experience with a new fence, a healed relationship with my neighbor, and a much deeper understanding of how community associations work. I also developed a passionate hatred of bamboo that has never quite faded. Whenever I see it in someone's yard, I feel compelled to ask if they installed a proper root barrier. Most people think I am being paranoid. Richard and I just share a knowing look. The financial toll was significant, but manageable. Between the insurance recovery and eventually being reimbursed by Richard's insurance company, I came out roughly even on the fence repairs. The bamboo removal costs I paid out of pocket, but I rationalized that as an investment in preventing future damage. My credit card balance eventually got paid down. The emergency fund I had depleted slowly got rebuilt. Richard's financial situation took longer to recover. Between the reduced HOA fines, the bamboo removal, the loan from his father-in-law, and all the other related costs, he estimated the whole disaster cost him around $20,000. But he was still in his house, still had his family, and had learned some valuable lessons about landscaping choices. The whole experience taught me something important about suburban life that I had not fully appreciated before. We live in these planned communities with their rules and regulations, and we often chafe against them without thinking about why they exist. But the rules are created and enforced by people, and people are flawed. They make mistakes, they let power go to their heads, they lose perspective on what actually matters. The bamboo was a problem. It genuinely did cause damage and needed to be addressed. But the way the HOA initially handled it, with rigid rule enforcement and escalating fines, made everything worse. It turned neighbors into enemies, almost destroyed a family, and generated enormous stress and expense for everyone involved. A little flexibility, a little compassion, a little willingness to work together could have prevented most of that. I think about that sometimes when I'm sitting in my backyard, looking at my fence. It is a nice fence, sturdy cedar that should last for decades. Behind it, Richard's yard is peaceful and bamboo-free. Kids play in both our yards on summer evenings. Dogs bark, grills smoke. Life goes on in its normal suburban rhythm. The bamboo is gone, but the lessons remain. Be a good neighbor. Communicate early and often. Do not let problems fester. Research before you plant. Install root barriers for aggressive species. Show compassion when people make mistakes. Push back against petty tyranny. Get involved in your community's governance. And never, ever plant running bamboo. 2 years after the initial fence destruction, I was elected to the HOA board myself. I had not planned to run, but several neighbors approached me and said the board needed someone who understood what it was like to deal with a serious neighbor dispute. They wanted someone who would keep the new, more reasonable approach to enforcement in place. I agreed to run and won a seat easily. Now I sit in those monthly board meetings, helping to make decisions about pool maintenance and landscaping standards and architectural approvals. It is boring work most of the time, but it is important. Every decision we make affects real people's lives and finances. I try to remember that, especially when reviewing violation notices. We had a case recently where a homeowner's tree fell and damaged their neighbor's shed. The neighbor wanted the HOA to fine the tree owner. The tree owner argued it was an act of God. The tree was healthy. The storm was unprecedented. It could have turned into another escalating disaster. Instead, we brought both neighbors together with a mediator. They worked out a solution where the tree owner's insurance paid most of the costs. The neighbor agreed to upgrade the shed while it was being repaired anyway, and everyone walked away satisfied. No fines, no lawsuits, just neighbors working together to solve a problem. That is what I learned from the bamboo disaster. Community living requires actual community. It requires people to see each other as humans rather than property owners or rule violators. It requires flexibility and compassion alongside standards and enforcement. Richard served on the Architectural Review Committee for a year, using his landscape architecture background to help homeowners plan projects that would comply with HOA requirements while achieving their goals. He became the go-to person for questions about plant selection, and he never recommended bamboo to anyone. The local news did a follow-up story on our community 2 years after the original bamboo disaster aired. They wanted to show how the reforms had worked out. Kelly Sharp came back and interviewed both Richard and me, as well as James Peterson and several other board members. This community went from a cautionary tale to a model for reasonable HOA governance, Kelly said during the segment. It took a disaster to get there, but the residents of Palmetto Springs learned valuable lessons about balance, compassion, and community. They showed footage of the board meeting where new policies were being debated, residents engaging respectfully with board members, everyone working together. It was a stark contrast to the angry confrontations that had dominated the original story. The story concluded with Kelly standing in Richard's backyard where green grass now grew where bamboo had once threatened to take over. Sometimes it takes hitting rock bottom to build something better. For this community, bamboo was rock bottom. What they built afterward is a lesson for HOAs across Florida and beyond. I keep a small framed photo on my desk at home. It is a picture of the destroyed fence taken on that first day when everything fell apart. I look at it sometimes when I am dealing with HOA business, especially when a case seems complicated or emotions are running high. It reminds me how quickly things can spiral out of control and how important it is to keep perspective on what actually matters. The fence is just wood. The bamboo was just a plant. What really mattered was the people, the families, the community. We almost lost sight of that in the midst of rules and fines and legal threats. But we found our way back. Richard's kids are older now. His daughter's in middle school, his son in elementary school. They play in their bamboo-free yard with the neighborhood kids. Sometimes I hear them talking about the bamboo disaster like it is ancient history, this crazy thing that happened when they were little. To them, it is just a story their parents tell at dinner parties. For Richard and me, it is more than that. It is a reminder of how fragile suburban peace can be, how quickly neighbors can become adversaries, and how much work it takes to build and maintain real community. We talk about it sometimes over beers on his back patio, two guys who went through something difficult together and came out the other side with a better understanding of what it means to be neighbors. Jennifer sometimes jokes that the bamboo was the best thing that ever happened to them in a weird way. It nearly destroyed their marriage, their finances, and their home, but surviving it together made them stronger. They do not take things for granted anymore. They communicate better. They are more careful about the decisions they make and the consequences those decisions might have. I feel similarly about my relationship with my community. Before the bamboo, I had been checked out, a passive resident who paid dues and assumed everything would be fine. After the bamboo, I became engaged, active, invested in making sure our HOA served the residents rather than the other way around. The community is better for it. We still have standards. Fences must be maintained, lawns must be cut, paint colors must be approved, but we enforce those standards with humanity and flexibility. We work with people instead of against them. We remember that rules exist to serve the community, not to punish it. Last week, a new resident asked me about planting bamboo for privacy. I spent 20 minutes explaining everything that had happened, showing them photos of the destruction, walking them through the costs and consequences. They decided to plant Leyland cypress instead, a fast-growing evergreen that would give them privacy without the risk of invasive spread. "Thank you for warning me," they said as they were leaving. "I had no idea bamboo could be such a problem." "Most people do not," I replied. "That is why I tell the story, so other people do not have to learn the hard way." Richard and I have become something like advocates for responsible landscaping in our community. We give talks at the new homeowner orientation sessions about plant selection and the importance of researching before you plant. We show photos of the bamboo damage. We explain the costs, financial and personal, of invasive species. We answer questions about root barriers and native plants and sustainable landscaping. It is our way of taking something terrible that happened and turning it into something useful. The bamboo destroyed a fence and nearly destroyed a family. But it also brought a community together, reformed an abusive HOA, and taught a lot of people valuable lessons about being better neighbors. I still live in the same house in Palmetto Springs. Richard and his family are still next door. My fence still stands strong, protected by the root barrier that cost me thousands of dollars, but has prevented any further invasions. His yard is green and peaceful, filled with carefully selected non-invasive plants. On summer evenings, we sit in our respective backyards, sometimes calling out conversations over the fence. Our dogs play together. His kids help me rake leaves in the fall. I help him set up Christmas lights in the winter. We borrow tools from each other. We take in packages when someone is traveling. We watch out for each other's property. We are neighbors, in the truest sense of the word. Not just people who live next to each other, but people who have been through something difficult together and come out the other side with mutual respect and understanding. The bamboo is gone, but its legacy remains. Every time I look at my fence, I remember. Every time I attend a board meeting, I remember. Every time I interact with Richard and his family, I remember. Not with anger or resentment, but with gratitude that we all survived, learned, and became better for it. That is what community is supposed to be about. Not rules for the sake of rules or punishment for the sake of punishment, but people working together to build something worth living in. Sometimes it takes a disaster to remember that. For us, the disaster came in the form of an invasive plant that cost tens of thousands of dollars and months of stress to remove. But we removed it. We survived it. We are stronger for it, and we will never ever plant bamboo again.